There's a side to caregiving that often goes unseen. Imagine a woman sitting in her car after leaving a memory care facility. The engine is off, her hands are on the wheel, and she's too exhausted to drive. She isn't crying, she just feels drained. She has a care plan meeting soon, needs to pick up her teenager, and there's a voicemail from the facility she hasn't checked yet. She already knows it's another request. I know that parking lot well. I want to share my story because I've been through this too. For 5 years, I watched my father, Gene, decline while living 4 hours away. Lewy body dementia took him slowly, and for most of that time, my mother, Judy, was determined to care for him herself. I started grieving both the distance and his decline long before anyone called me a caregiver. Eventually, things changed. The doctor said my dad needed memory care for his safety, and since my mother couldn't make those decisions anymore, I became the one who did. Later, my mother was diagnosed with a stage 4 brain tumor. Suddenly, I was facing two losses at once. For 12 weeks, I made decisions for both parents, managed my mother's hospice care, and went to court for guardianship while she was dying. I was grieving both of them at the same time. At the same time, I didn't have the words for what I was experiencing. I was managing all of this while raising three teenagers, and my body was changing in ways I didn't understand. My husband supported me and kept our home and kids steady so I could care for my parents. I'll talk more about those changes in my body later because what I missed then is actually the foundation of this whole show. My mom died. And after she passed, my dad stayed in memory care, although we had to move him to a different state. And the calls kept coming. Every fall, every behavior, every question came to me. And here's what I want you to know. After my father died, my body didn't believe it was over. For 3 months, I jumped every time the phone rang or buzzed. The responsibility of going there every week was gone, but my nervous system hadn't caught up. Today, I want to talk about the season that took more from my body than any other, why it's especially hard on women, and what real recovery looks like. I'll share practical steps you can take to support your recovery and well-being. Whether you're in the middle of caregiving and starting to rebuild, I'll offer specific, actionable strategies later in this episode to help your body and mind heal. Caring for a parent with dementia isn't just difficult. It truly changes your body. I want you to take this as permission to feel what you feel, not as a diagnosis. One finding changed how I saw everything. Researchers Richard Schultz and Scott Beach followed older caregivers for years. Those who felt emotionally strained had a 63% higher risk of dying than people who weren't caregivers. Think about that. It wasn't the tasks themselves, but the strain of carrying them. Your exhaustion isn't a flaw, it is a real measurable burden. You can see this burden even in how the body heals. Janice Glaser, who studied stress for years, once gave small standard wounds to women caring for relatives with Alzheimer's. Their wounds healed much more slowly than those women who weren't caregivers. This shows how deeply stress affects the body, even its basic repair work. The emotional toll is common too. For people caring for someone with dementia, depression and anxiety are more common than not. If you felt either, you're not failing at caregiving. You're reacting the way any human would. And I'm going to keep repeating this because it matters. I am a brain health educator and a coach, not your doctor or therapist. I'm not here to diagnose you, but I want you to know that what you're feeling is real, has a name. If your feelings or symptoms are becoming overwhelming, please reach out to a healthcare provider or a mental health professional. Getting help is not just valid, it is often the key part of self-care during the challenges of caregiving. Now, I want to share something I missed in my own story, something that often gets left out of conversations about caregiving. Most women start caring for a parent in their 40s or 50s, which is also when perimenopause usually begins. Perimenopause lasts 2 to 7 years as estrogen starts to fluctuate and then drops before menopause. The problem is most women haven't even heard the word. They know about menopause, usually just as hot flashes and periods ending, but that's where the education stops. I hadn't heard of it either, and I work in health. This matters because estrogen does more than control reproduction. Neuroscientist Dr. Lisa Mosconi, author of The Menopause Brain, has shown that estrogen helps the female brain produce energy, maintain stable moods, preserve memory, and regulate sleep. So when estrogen starts to fluctuate during perimenopause, The symptoms aren't just physical. They can show up as brain fog, forgetfulness, poor sleep, anxiety, and low mood that seem to come out of nowhere. Mosconi describes the menopause as a brain transition, not just an ovarian one. Now, add caregiving to the mix because chronic stress causes many of the same symptoms: poor sleep, brain fog, irritability, and a flat mood. Imagine a woman in this season trying to figure out what's wrong. She often can't tell if it's grief, exhaustion, perimenopause, or even early dementia, the same disease she's been watching and now quietly fears for herself. From the inside, they all feel familiar. No one has ever taught her how to tell them apart. There are a few clues that sometimes help sort the signals. Grief often comes in waves with memories or reminders, triggering sharp surges of emotion, and may be accompanied by longing or yearning for a loved one. Chronic stress tends to cause persistent tension, irritability, trouble sleep, and physical symptoms such as headaches or stomach issues that build over time. Perimenopause may come with hot flashes, night sweats, new migraines, or changes in periods if you still have them, along with mood changes and brain fog. But these lines often blur and the symptoms often overlap. If you are unsure what you are noticing in yourself, or if you're worried, it can help to talk with your healthcare provider. You deserve clarity, and support is available. My own experience had an extra twist. Years earlier, I had a hysterectomy that left one ovary in place. That meant I no longer had periods, so I had already lost the one signal most women use to notice the change beginning. My ovary kept working, my hormones kept shifting, and I had no monthly clue that perimenopause had arrived. I spent that whole caregiving stretch assuming my symptoms were just stress. Looking back, I'm pretty sure the stress and the hormones made each other harder to bear. I want to leave you with this reassuring side of this because Mosconi's research offers hope. The brain changes of perimenopause are mostly a transition, not a permanent decline. The fog is real, and for most women, it is not the start of losing their minds. That single distinction is the reason this show exists. Now let's shift to another topic I hear a lot about. The work rarely divides evenly, and I hear this from people all the time. In most families, one adult child takes on most of the caregiving while the others do less. There are reasons that this happens, and most have nothing to do with who loves the parent most. Sometimes it's geography, like who lives nearby and who lives far away. Sometimes it's capacity. One person can handle watching the decline and another just can't. And very often it's legal. When one person has power of attorney or is the court-appointed guardian, the decisions fall to them by design. The paperwork names one adult as the main contact for everything. I lived inside that structure, so I'm not describing it from a distance. And placing a parent in memory care does not give you your time back. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of the whole season. People assume that once a loved one is in a facility, the caregiving stops. It doesn't. It only changes shape. You still sit through the care plan meetings. You still take the call when a medication changes or a fall is reported. You still manage the doctors and the specialists, and eventually the hospice conversations. You carry the mental load of being the one who knows everything: the allergies, the history, the paperwork. That load does not show up on anyone's calendar. Overwhelmed by this invisible burden, know that you are not alone. There are ways to lighten it, even if just a little. Try keeping a caregiving journal, a simple place just to jot down questions, updates, and worries as they come. Sometimes getting these thoughts out of your head and onto paper helps to clear some space inside. Now, if possible, look for some small ways to share or delegate certain responsibilities, even if it's just asking a family member to handle a specific task or reaching out to a friend for support, whether practical or emotional. Managing the mental load does not mean you have to carry every piece by yourself. So if you've been telling yourself that you should be coping better now that your parents is somewhere safe, I would gently push back. The setting has changed. The responsibility has not left you. There is a part of this that almost no one warns you about, and this involves hospice. Now, most of us picture hospice as something that arrives near the end and stays until the end. With dementia, it often does not work that way. Dementia is unusually hard to predict. A person can decline for years without following the timeline that hospice eligibility is built around, which is a prognosis of 6 months or less. So people with dementia often outlive that window while they are still terminally ill, when that happens, they can be discharged from hospice while they're still dying. Researchers such as Elizabeth Luth have documented how often this occurs, and it is far more common than most families ever expect. This is exactly what happened with my father. Hospice removed my dad after 6 months. He died about 2 months later. I appealed the decision, and I was still told no. So with the help of his care team, I had to find a different hospice that would take him because everyone close to him knew he needed it. Now, let me tell you why that fight was worth every hour, because this is the part that still matters to me the most. Hospice is what kept my dad out of the hospital. Without it, every fall and every infection became a reason to send him to the emergency room. For my dad, a hospital trip meant an ambulance because he was across the state line, and the ambulance frightened him badly. He could not understand what was happening to him, so he fought it, and then he had to be sedated. Each of those trips was a fresh trauma on top of the dementia. Hospice changed the goal of his care. It let the falls and the infections be treated where he already lived, calmly, instead of becoming another frightening ride he never agreed to. So if you are advocating for someone with dementia, know this ahead of time. The hospice door can close before the end, and you may have to push it back open. That is not a failure on your part. It is a flaw in the system's way of measuring a disease that refuses to keep a schedule. Now, there's a specific kind of grief that dementia brings, and naming it matters. Pauline Boss, a family therapist and researcher, coined the term ambiguous loss. She wrote about it in her book of the same name and later in Loving Someone Who Has Dementia. Ambiguous loss happens when the person is physically present but psychologically absent. The body is here, the person you knew is in many moments gone, and then sometimes, like my dad, they return for an afternoon, which starts the hope and heartbreak all over again. This is where anticipatory grief grows. You start mourning before the death because the losses are already happening. You lose the parent who knew your name. You lose the person you used to call for advice. You lose the future you thought you'd have together. Each of these is a real loss, and you grieve them in real time while still caring for the body that remains. Boss made a point that's worth remembering. In ordinary grief, we look for closure, and in ambiguous loss, closure isn't possible, and chasing it only makes the exhaustion worse. Her advice was not to resolve the loss, but to learn to live with the uncertainty without letting it break you. That shift lets caregivers stop waiting for that clean ending that never comes. If you have felt as though you were grieving for years before anyone offered you a single condolence, you were. The grief was accurate. The world around you had no ritual for a loss with no funeral. Now, I want to talk about the moment families rarely discuss out loud and the feeling that so often follows it. When a parent with advanced dementia dies, many caregivers feel relief. Relief that the suffering is over. Relief that the long vigil has ended. Relief, quietly, for themselves. And almost right away, that relief collides with guilt because it can feel like relief means you didn't love them enough. And I want to give you the science here because it's free. When Schultz and Beach followed their caregivers through the death itself, the strained caregivers did not fall apart afterward the way you might expect. The hardest blows of grief landed on people whose loss was sudden. For those who had carried a long, heavy caregiving load, the time after death was not a fresh collapse. Much of the grieving had already happened year after year, and the end of the strain was, in a real sense, an easing. So if you felt relief, you're not an outlier and you're not cold. You had already been grieving for a long time. The relief was not that they were gone. It was a relief that the suffering was over for them and for you. Those are different things, and love is fully present in both. You can hold two truths at once. You can miss someone with your whole chest and also be glad that the ordeal is finished. That is not a contradiction. That is what it looks like to love someone all the way through a disease like this one. Now, this is the part I most wanted to reach because it is the part I rarely hear anyone handle well. When the caregiving ends, you do not simply get the old version of yourself back. The body that carried years of strain, broken sleep, skipped meals, and grief is not the same body that walked into this season. And remember what we said earlier. For many women, that body is also moving through perimenopause and settling into the years after it. You are not rebuilding from one thing. You are rebuilding from several things at once. The instinct for those of us who track our health is to treat the recovery like a project and start optimizing our brain health. You know I love data. I wear an Aura ring and a Whoop, and I have built future episodes around what they measure. So hear me clearly. The season right after caregiving is not the season to chase recovery scores. If you open your Whoop app the week after the funeral and it tells you your recovery is in the red and your heart rate variability has dropped, the device is not wrong. It is telling you something you already know. Your body has been through a significant physiological event, and it will take time to recover. Mary Frances O'Connor, a neuroscientist who wrote The Grieving Body, makes this case clearly. Grief is not only an emotional experience. It affects the heart, hormones, and immune system and poses real physical risk. She also describes grieving as a form of learning, a slow process of teaching your brain to live in a world that no longer holds the person you lost. Learning of that size cannot be rushed, nor can a percentage of readiness grade it. On this show, track it, measure it, optimize it. But for this one season, I want to add a step that comes before all three of those things. First, let your body feel safe. So instead of a protocol, let me offer you something else. It looks like sleep you protect without grading. For a while, the goal is rest, not a better sleep score. If you wake up at 3 in the morning, that is a grieving nervous system doing what a grieving nervous system does. It looks like steady nourishment instead of restriction. After a season of forgetting to eat, the body needs ordinary, reliable fuel far more than it needs a stricter plan or a new food challenge. It looks like a movement that restores rather than punishes. A walk outside, sunlight in your face, the dog beside you. The point is to feel regulated, not to set a record. The records can wait until you have the reserves to chase them. And it looks like rebuilding a life that is not organized around someone else's illness. Caregiving narrows your whole world down to one person's need. And reconnecting with friends, with quiet, with parts of yourself you set down is not a luxury, it is how the body actually repairs. You will get back to your numbers. The tracking and measuring will serve you again, as will the goals, just not now. First, the body has to feel safe before it can be asked to perform. That order matters, and reversing it is how good intentions quietly become one more source of strain. So if you're in the thick of caregiving right now, take one thing from this episode. The cost you are paying is real. Your fatigue is not weakness, and the fog you feel may be grief, stress, and perimenopause all at once, none of which means you are broken. While so much of this feels out of your control, choose one or two small ways to care for yourself each day. That might look like stepping outside for 5 minutes for some fresh air, setting a daily alarm to drink a glass of water, or simply allowing yourself to rest for a moment without guilt. These tiny actions are not selfish or insignificant. They are ways to remind your body and your mind that you matter too. If you are on the other side of it, rebuilding, give yourself a far longer runway than you would ever give someone else. I am an educator and a coach, not a clinician, so let me say this plainly. If your grief is not lifting, if it is pulling you under rather than slowly reshaping, please talk to a licensed grief counselor or your physician. There is real help, and reaching for it is not a sign that you are doing recovery wrong. I will leave the names behind everything I mentioned today in the show notes. Take care of the body that carried all this. This is the Healthy Life Approach podcast. I will see you next time. Take care of your beautiful brain. Disclaimer, I am a certified health coach, not a physician. This episode is educational, not medical advice. If you are experiencing any of these symptoms, please consult a licensed healthcare professional for proper evaluation and personalized treatment. Please consult your licensed provider about medical concerns and before starting any supplements, medications, protocols, or lifestyle changes. This podcast does not create a coach-client relationship. Individual results may vary. From time to time, episodes and materials may include affiliate links that may provide a small commission at no extra cost to you. Thank you for being here.